So, life. Life has some real basic parameters when you look at it from the perspective of us as evolved animals. Benefit society a little bit, be happy, make offspring, pass on your genetics. Genetics are kind of a funny thing. The common view in the mainstream world is that genetics are fixed. You have this DNA when you're born, and you have it when you're dead. And I think it's safe to say that generally the mitochondria DNA is seen to be constant as well. But I don't believe it's that way. In fact, I think it's programmable in certain parameters, especially we've heard of epigenetics, where stresses to an organism, human in this context, is then modifies what's later passed on through genetics. We may have heard of the potato famine in Ireland, where many people, almost starved. And then the offspring of the people who survived the near starvation tended to live very, very long lives. As a rule, many of them lived over 100 years. Epigenetics. But then there's just straight genetics and our genetics. It's so mysterious. They were only really discovered, genes that is, within the last 100 years in any sort of appreciable way. And within like half a century, we're editing them. There was some talk that there was gene editing back in the 70s even. It goes beyond remarkable considering how new the science was at that time. There are going to be genetics engineered for robots. There's going to be living brain tissue and maybe some tendons and things, but I think probably mostly just neural tissue will be engineered, genetically programmed to grow specifically for particular androids, particular robots. The idea of having brain tissue specifically crafted to go with a particular model of robot. It seems kind of a stretch right now how that would work out, but within 20 years, that's going to be common. What's interesting to me is that as humans are now getting chip implants to affect their thoughts, interact with their thoughts, allow their brain to control other things. Well, robots are going to be dialed in, already digital. You know, I really can't fathom a robot in the next 50 years that's not going to have some connectivity digitally. I can't really imagine a robot at this point that's going to be strictly controlled with neural tissue without some sort of computer attachments. So we can imagine that insofar as they are able to have neural tissue, they're also going to be connected to the cloud, to the internet. So there will be this dual thinking function, thinking characteristic. You'll have a soft thinking and you'll have a digital, it's purely electronic, ethereal thinking. So the genes. There was someone who considered themselves to be a genetic artist, and they were going to put all of Wikipedia into the genetics of an apple. So the apple itself that would grow from a tree, the DNA in that would contain all of Wikipedia. That just goes to show you how vast amount of information is able to be contained within genetics. I think largely people think of, there's this bit, this bit, this bit, this bit. But how could someone contain all the information in Wikipedia in the genetics of one plant? That boggles my mind. And it really lends itself to consider that if humans were indeed engineered by a race of physical beings, not by some ethereal God force, but actually created by a group of beings, the Anunnaki or whoever, from a human standpoint, from my standpoint, it would be in almost insurmountably tempting to put some information into the genetics that would be passed along so that later generations, us specifically, when we cracked the genetic method, we could retrieve some sort of information, like the Ark of the Covenant that was in our DNA, pass along. And I think that there may be something to that. You know, I'm not really big into the Jewish religion. I don't get into the cult of chosen people. But it's interesting to think that maybe, just maybe, um, the tradition of Jewish people is that it's not a race, but a cultural differentiation, and that anybody who comes from the legacy of humans that were at Mount Sinai contain an extra little spark in their soul. Not better or worse, but they have an extra special little spark. You know, God chose them somehow. Well, it's tempting to think that maybe, just maybe, there is some sort of extra genetic material, some sort of code information that was put into their DNA. And they are the Ark of the Covenant. They are the ones who have been chosen to have this information embedded in their DNA. All of Wikipedia. Think how much information that is into the genetics of an apple. How much more complex a human must be. Well, some plants have more DNA than humans. Like humans and most animals and even plants, when you get the DNA from one and you get the DNA from another, it mixes. You get the same number of DNA in the end, just a mix. Wheat, on the other hand, it's able to compound its DNA. So there's some wheat with 2 sets of genes, some wheat with 6 sets of genes. It's a very curious thing. There's cursory evidence that the dwarf wheat that is so widely grown causes reactions in the gluten sensitive people, wheat sensitive people, more so than the wheat with just 2 sets of genes. So that's something to look into for people who are interested in uh, the reactions of wheat in humans. But humans are complex enough genetically. All of the information in Wikipedia. You'd hardly need a paragraph to say, hey, you're from the star seed system, this system. We engineered you for this reason. You can get that into a few sentences. If you had a gigabyte of information you could embed into the genetics of a race of people, how would you not put that there? It would be so tempting, unless there's some sort of galactic law that you don't do that. It's got to be there if we were genetically manipulated. I shouldn't say got it. Whoever engineered us, if that is our history, truly, would have debated it or considered it at least. What would they have said? If, just speculation here, if we do have some sort of embedded information in our DNA collectively, what does it say? What would it say? What, I mean, all of Wikipedia, think how much information that is. It could have mathematical formulas. Although, if we are discovering DNA, we would have a huge amount of, they could presume that we had a huge amount of knowledge. But any advanced race would know that it's possible to get weird strings of technology and miss wide swaths of knowledge and information. They wouldn't want to give us anything to shoot ourselves in the foot with, but what would they give us? They'd give us some quantum theory. They would give us some dynamics of the constructs of the universe. They would give us what? Some sort of moral directive? They would give us a new religion, an old religion, a true religion. What would you put in there? What would you put in there? A list of plants on Earth that make really good drugs? And what would be useful? I would think, considering it'd be about genetics, you'd have to add something about genes and the way genes truly function, truly work across time. I can only fathom what our future holds. Think about that, the last 50 years, the next 5,000 years. How do we not have a record of 5,000 years ago from before the flood? Either it was deleted by the Smithsonian crazies or what? Something's being hidden from us. Our true history is being hidden from us. Future history. The future history needs to be protected. How? How can we safeguard the future history? Brave New World, book burning, thought think, double think, correcting the past to make sense for the anticipated future. These things are dangerously possible as everything becomes digitized. You know, I'm a romantic when it comes to the Library of Alexandria. The idea of it, such a beautiful idea that this existed. And it's widely known that when a ship would enter the harbor, it would be searched for books. And something I read said that a copy of the book would be returned to the ship, and only the original would be kept for the library. In this way, they amassed hundreds of thousands of scrolls, books, many of which had to be copied over the course of a couple of hundred years because they would deteriorate. Scribe culture was huge. And I have to wonder, just playfully, mind you, but I have to wonder how accurately those scrolls were copied. Just musing, they could have confiscated scrolls, edited them in the copy, and then given the edited copy back, you know, making Zeus the man in this particular one, etc. It's tempting to think about what is and what could be, but it's also tempting to think about what actually was. It's out there for people to look. The way World War II went down, it isn't how the textbooks taught us. He who controls information controls a huge amount. The Germans and the British were potentially going to be allied against the Russians. The royalty of Germany and the royalty of Britain, aristocracy of Germany and the royalty of Britain, they were intermixed. There's plenty of factories that weren't allowed to be bombed because they were owned by the Allies. It was a war that was multi-dimensional. But what we receive is a narrative that makes sense to our moral compass, but it's not necessarily accurate. We have to assume that in the future these things are going to go on. Just because we have the cloud, it's tempting to think that things will be widely known forever. And actually, let's face it, with the invention of the blockchain, Ethereum, it's so mysterious I can't say if it's really real, but I think it's really real. If you have a blockchain information hub, then things like futures past will be protected from being erased. We live in exciting times. We live on the edge of a razor. The edge of the razor that's a fulcrum. We're traveling along this edge. We don't want to fall off one way or the other, and we've got a balance beam. This balance beam is a little bit unusual in that humans, in a lot of ways, can't handle the truth. I say it. It's sad, but I'll say it. Humans need to be herded like animals. They're lazy, and they'll just sit around and eat free ice cream if you let them. You have to scare them. Say someone's coming to get them. You need them to go over to the park. The park might be the best place for them. They're sitting on a dirty street corner. You've got this nice park. You say, hey, go sit in the park. And they say, oh, well, we don't want to move. Well, you know they'll be happier in the park. And frankly, it'll be better for society if they're in the park. But they have to be scared. They have to be herded to go into the park. Does that make it a sin to lie to them if they're going to be better off being in the park? I'm a fan of truth. I'm a fan of knowledge. I'm a fan of wisdom and of honorable people. I'm a fan of what is just and what is good. Signing out.